You've been told a story about money, probably in a classroom, and it goes like this. A long time ago, before money, people used barter. You had a chicken, your neighbor had a sack of grain, and you traded. Simple. But barter was clumsy. What if you wanted grain and your neighbor didn't want your chicken? So, the story goes, humans cleverly invented money to fix this. A neutral thing everyone would accept. It's a clean, logical story. It's in economics textbooks. It's been repeated for over 200 years, and it is almost completely wrong. There is no historical evidence that it ever happened. Anthropologists have searched for the barter economy that money supposedly replaced, and they have never found it. Not once. The real story of where money came from is stranger, older, and a lot more unsettling than the fairy tale you were taught. Because money wasn't born to make trade easier. It was born from debt, and it changed what a human being is worth. Let's start with the myth itself, because it has a name and an author. The barter origin story traces back to Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, who described it in 1776. A world of people swapping goods directly, stumbling into the problem economists now call the double coincidence of wants. You have to want what I have, and I have to want what you have at the exact same time, or no trade happens. Money, Smith argued, emerged naturally as the solution. It's elegant, it's intuitive, and for 2 centuries, basically everyone accepted it. There was just one problem. When anthropologists actually went looking for these barter societies in the field, across the entire historical and ethnographic record, they came up empty. The late anthropologist David Graeber, who spent years on this question, put it bluntly. No example of a barter economy, pure and simple, has ever been described. The thing money supposedly replaced never existed in the first place. So what did people actually do before money? And here's where it gets interesting. They didn't barter, they used credit. Imagine a small village where everyone knows everyone. You're a farmer, and your neighbor needs a hand repairing his roof. You help him. Nobody pulls out a chicken to pay on the spot. He simply owes you one now. A favor, an obligation. Maybe next month he gives you some of his harvest, or helps you when your fence breaks. The whole community runs on a vast, invisible web of who owes what to whom, tracked entirely in memory and reputation. This isn't barter, it's debt, in its oldest and most human form. And it works perfectly well without any money at all because the trust between people is the currency. For most of human history, this is how people lived. Not trading trinkets, but keeping a running mental tally of obligations. But a system built on memory has a ceiling. It works in a village of 100 people who know each other. It falls apart the moment you have a city of thousands, full of strangers, with grain and silver and labor moving in every direction. You can't remember what 10,000 strangers owe each other. You need to write it down. And that, not barter, is where money actually begins. Go back about 5,000 years, to ancient Mesopotamia, in what is now Iraq. This is where the earliest writing on Earth shows up, and here's the part nobody tells you. A huge portion of that first writing isn't poetry or prayer or history, it's accounting. The first thing humans used writing for, on a massive scale, was to track debt. Archaeologists have dug up tens of thousands of clay tablets from this period, and they are covered in records of who owes what. So many barrels of barley owed to the temple, so much silver owed by one man to another. These tablets were the world's first financial ledgers. Some were even sealed inside clay envelopes, a tamper-proof record of a debt thousands of years before paper. Money existed here, but not as coins. It existed as a number in a ledger, a unit for measuring obligation. And they needed a standard unit to measure it all in. That unit was the shekel. Now, most people think a shekel was a coin. It wasn't, not at first. The shekel began as a unit of weight, specifically a weight of barley, about 180 grains of it. The temples of Mesopotamia used it as a measuring stick to keep their accounts straight. They could say a worker was owed so many shekels of silver, or that a debt equaled so many shekels of grain, and everyone understood exactly what that meant. There were no coins changing hands. The silver often just sat in the temple vault. The shekel was a concept, a yardstick for value, a way to make every different kind of debt comparable in a single language of numbers. Money, in other words, started as an idea before it was ever an object. It was math before it was metal. So if money was already running entire civilizations as pure accounting, thousands of years before coins, then here's the obvious question. Why did anyone ever bother to invent the coin at all? For that, we jump forward to around 600 BCE to a kingdom called Lydia in what's now Western Turkey. The Lydians had a lucky geographical gift. A river called the Pactolus ran through their land, and its bed was full of electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver. And it was the Lydian king, most likely a ruler named Alyattes, who did something genuinely new. He took small, standardized lumps of this electrum and stamped them with the royal symbol, the head of a roaring lion. That stamp was the whole invention. Because before the stamp, if a stranger handed you a lump of metal, you had to weigh it, test its purity, and hope you weren't being cheated. The king's stamp changed everything. It was a guarantee. It said, "The authority of the crown promises this exact weight and this exact value." You didn't have to trust the stranger anymore. You only had to trust the king. The first coin wasn't really about the metal, it was about trust, mass-produced and stamped into a portable object that anyone could verify at a glance. But here's the part the textbook leaves out, and it's the most revealing detail of all. These first coins were almost certainly not invented to help ordinary people buy bread at the market. Look at their value. A single one of those early Lydian coins was worth roughly a month of a soldier's wages. You weren't buying a loaf with that. So who were coins really for? Two groups, soldiers and the state. Think about what an empire actually needs. It needs to pay an army, often soldiers far from home, often foreign mercenaries who don't share your village web of trust and favors. You can't pay them in IOS. They want something solid now. And the state needs to collect taxes from a sprawling population. Coins solved both at once, and they locked together into a brutal machine. The king mints coins, pays his soldiers with them, then demands that every citizen pay their taxes back in those same coins. Suddenly, the entire population has to get hold of the king's coins, which means they have to sell their grain, their labor, their goods, to soldiers and to each other to obtain them. In one move, the king feeds his army and forces his whole economy to revolve around his currency. Coins didn't grow up gently from friendly trade. They were, in large part, a technology of war and power. And this is where the real weight of the story lands. Because the moment everything has a precise, universal price, something shifts in how humans see each other. When value is just a vague web of favors between people who know each other, a person is hard to reduce to a number. But once money can measure anything, it can start to measure everything. Graeber pointed to a chilling detail in the ancient records. In these early money economies, you begin to see human life itself getting a price tag. Fines for killing a man, measured in silver. The cost of a wife, in shekels. And most disturbingly, the rise of debt so large it could swallow a person whole. In Mesopotamia, a farmer who couldn't pay what he owed could be forced to hand over his children into debt bondage or end up enslaved himself. The same ledger that tracked barrels of grain could now tally up a human being. Money made trade efficient, yes, but it also made it possible for the first time to put an exact number on a person and to own them when they couldn't pay. So the next time you tap your card or hand over a bill, remember what you're actually holding. Not a clever tool someone invented to replace swapping chickens. You're holding the descendant of a clay tablet tracking a debt, of a king's stamp promising trust to strangers, of a machine built to feed armies and bind a population to its ruler. Money was never just a neutral way to make life easier. From the very beginning, it was a way to measure what we owe, to decide what things are worth, and eventually, to put a price on us. The story they taught you said money set us free from the clumsiness of barter. The truth is, money was the moment humanity learned to keep score, and we have never stopped counting since.